Welcome to my home and welcome to my dance studio, which is the home of my walls of fame and obviously my sports memorabilia collection, which is an important backdrop to the principles of leadership and management that we're going to talk about right now. You know, I was a house guest of Muhammad Ali way back in 1988. I've hung out with Michael Jordan many times, played some golf, and I've had the opportunity, the privilege to interview him and find out why he always wants the ball in the last 4 minutes of the game. One of my prized possessions is an autographed basketball by Pippen Jordan and Dennis Rodman. And because we're going to discuss a little bit about ice hockey, I also want you to pay attention to my autographed hockey stick signed by the 1997 playoff team, the New York Rangers, who are awesome with Messier and his boys. You see, I want to discuss feedback, which is the breakfast of champions. And if any of us have had that chance to watch The Last Dance, which was a documentary on the Bulls and Michael Jordan, they won 6 world championships. And if you watched the intensity and the intention of Michael Jordan, never once was it about a shoe deal, never once was it about making money, never once was it about fame and fortune, never once was it about the next contract. It was only about one thing. Michael Jordan was driven to become the very best basketball player he could be. And by increasing his frequency of feedback, it also allowed him, inspired him, drove him to become the very best basketball player of his generation. So let's talk about feedback because it relates to leadership management. Successful leaders and managers focus on doing things right. And they become so good at it that they can actually inspire and guide others to do things right. But if you want to be a significant leader, a significant manager, which also allows you to be a significant coach, a significant educator, and a significant parent, what we have to do is increase our frequency of feedback that allows us to not just do things right, but puts us in a position to always do the right things. Let me give you some examples. When NASA shoots a rocket off to the moon, feedback determines its direction and destination. Whenever that rocket goes off course, the feedback system, the guidance system inside the capsule starts beeping, beep, 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 and either automatically or manually by the astronauts, that rocket is immediately brought back on course to arrive at its predetermined destination. Question: what would happen if we shot that rocket off to the moon and we waited 60 to 90 days to check up on it like so many corporations do with their quarterly reports? Would that rocket end up in the moon? No, it would be headed towards Uranus or Neptune or Pluto, some other destination that we hadn't even thought of. And can you see how much more money and time it will take to bring that rocket back on course? Let me give you 3 examples that will illustrate the significance of increasing frequency of feedback, because 2 fundamental truths come out of feedback. Number 1, when we increase our frequency of feedback, it allows us to change the behavior before it's too late. And number 2, increasing our frequency of feedback also allows us to pick the most appropriate behavior in real time, in this moment, to almost guarantee that we will arrive at our preconceived desired destination and increase our chances of winning the game, sports game, the game of business, and especially the game of life. Let me give you 2 examples of 2 Olympic sports that take place basically on the same ice, so you can comparison and contrast the significance of feedback. You know, I was on the Olympic committee in the Winter Olympic Games here in my hometown of Salt Lake City, Utah. And we went to see the figure skating competition, and it was a very interesting experience for me because I'm an athlete. I can't really call it a sporting event, but I can call it an athletic competition because these figure skaters are definitely athletes. So visualize the arena packed, and in a figure skating event, we show up with coats, sometimes coats and ties. The women are in dress suits, dress pantsuits. It's almost a reverent occasion. And when they announce the names of the 2 skaters in the pairs division, the man and the woman, we give a polite applause because it's a reverent occasion. And sure enough, the gentleman takes a hold of the young lady's hand and they skate out of that backstage area. and they take their spot on the ice in a pre-designated spot, and they pose that John Travolta pose. The music begins, and all of a sudden they just take off skating, and they jump and twist and twirl and double axel and land, and the guy takes the lady's hand and whips her around, and she takes the man's hand and whips him around. And 4 minutes later, after this amazing exposition, they stop in the exact same spot they began on the last note of the music, and they again pose that John Travolta pose. And I was in the audience, and what's the reaction? Whoa. And as the skaters skate off and disappear into the cry room, as we call it, waiting for the judges' scores, here's the conversation. How'd they do? Don't know yet. Why not? The scores table hasn't flashed the score yet. We just sat there for 4 minutes and we don't have a clue what we just saw. Do you ever have that experience at the end of a workday, sitting behind your desk and you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? And now 2 minutes later, with the cameras on these skaters backstage, the indignant sportscaster puts the microphone right in their faces and says, so did you fall on purpose? How tragic was that? And suddenly the scores tables finally flashed the scores: 4.6, 4.4, 4.1, 2.1 from the Soviet judge, 9.7 from the French judge, because they've worked a deal out under the table before the competition began. God forgive me. When there's only 6 points possible. And now there's tears. And these skaters are beside themselves. Oh my gosh, we've worked years and years and put in thousands and thousands of hours and sacrificed relationships and opportunities. And now it's all down the tube for no reason other than they didn't have enough frequency of feedback during the skating competition to change their behavior before it was too late. Comparison contrast figure skating with ice hockey. The very next night in these Olympic Games, we went to the ice hockey competition. Is ice hockey a reverent occasion? Do the guys show up in coats and ties? Are the ladies in dress suits and pantsuits? No. Hockey games are intense. People bring they eat other people's popcorn. The organists play songs that have never even been written. Do you realize that ice hockey is the #1 cause of prison riots in North America? These prisoners are in jail. They're in prison watching a hockey game on TV. They become uncontrollably mad when they see this hockey player get a 5-minute penalty for the exact same offense they're doing 17 years for. In New York State, some guys climbed over the glass and started beating up the opposing team's coach. Why? Because in ice hockey, we have real-time frequency of feedback in a scoreboard. So at every minute, at all times, every player, every coach, and every fan knows exactly what the score is. And they know exactly how much time is remaining. And if this team is behind by 1 goal, they don't flip out, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. The coach takes out the goalkeeper, puts in a 6th attack man to increase their opportunity to score the winning goal and win the game, which is the entire reason why we form into a team and compete, is to win. Question: how does that happen? It's because of increased frequency of feedback. So the key question, my friends, is in your system of feedback, in your measurement system of feedback, in work, in your children's schools, and especially in our homes, and obviously on sports teams, is your measurement system and frequency of feedback more like ice hockey, or is it more like figure skating? What would happen if we increased our frequency of feedback with our children? As parents, are we not always guilty of trying to choose our children's friends? And what that does is it forces them to have 2 sets of friends. We've talked about that in other trainings. When our children bring home the friends, that they really hang out with, we have a chance in real-time frequency of feedback to give them counsel and support. You see, there's 3 kinds of feedback that we need to always solicit and appreciate. #1, it's factual feedback. Facts and figures and we need to hold ourselves and everyone else accountable without assessing blame. It's just the truth. It's just the facts. The second kind of feedback is motivational feedback, which is the coach. It's the leader. It's the executive in the corporation. It's the parent. You can. Come on, get up and go again. Motivational feedback is what triggers endorphins, and it allows us to hustle and find that second wind. And the third kind of feedback is obviously educational feedback, which is where we make the corrections. It's where we refine our performance and redefine what's possible, believing that no matter what your past has been, you have a spotless future. In real time, what would have happened had those figure skaters had an opportunity to make an adjustment and shift in what they were doing on the ice before their performance ended? Which brings us to the third example, basketball. You think about the intensity of being able to change our behavior before it's too late. Well, through a basketball analogy, a real experience that I had, you'll also understand the second thing we've already talked about, that increasing our frequency of feedback also allows us to pick the most appropriate behavior in that moment, in every moment, to increase our chances of winning the game. Basketball game, two teams going back and forth, rival teams. It was an intense game. And at the end of the game, with 3 seconds left in the game, this team was behind the other team by 1 point. They were getting the ball. After a timeout, they came back onto the floor. A player on the team that was behind by 1 point immediately threw the ball in to his teammate. His teammate immediately turned and shot the ball. When the ball was airborne, the buzzer that ended the game went off, and all of a sudden the ball swishes through the net. Nothing but net. The crowd erupts. The place goes crazy, pandemonium. And the team that was behind by 1 point wins the game by 2 points. Wait a minute. Interesting. How did they win by 2 when they were behind by 1? Well, when the player received the ball from his teammate and turned and immediately shot the ball, he didn't dribble down the court and immediately shoot a short jump shot. He turned and immediately threw it the entire length of the basketball court, 90 feet. And as I said, the buzzer went off while the ball was airborne. Swish, they win. The place goes crazy. Question, what would have happened to that player had he taken that shot in the middle of the first quarter? What would his coach have said? Hey, man, you got to calm down. We got to have a mandatory drug test, man. Why don't you bounce and dribble it a couple of times next time before you launch another one? But because of the increased frequency of feedback, not only could he and his teammates change their behavior, but it allowed them to pick the most appropriate behavior in that moment to change their stars, to change the outcome of the game, to win. Again, may I ask you, in your personal and professional lives, in all areas, leadership and management in a company, organizational setting, coaching a sports team, teaching in a school, and especially parenting in our own homes, is your measurement frequency of feedback system more like figure skating or ice hockey? And will you increase your frequency of feedback as a good basketball team does going down the stretch, as Michael Jordan epitomizes in The Last Dance? Knowing what the score is, knowing how much time is on the clock, knowing who is guarding him, knowing what has been happening in the game, he and his teammates, and especially Coach Phil Jackson, put themselves in a position to do whatever it took to win. I love quotes. And what would happen to your organization if everybody believed it is not enough to say, I will do my best? We must succeed in doing that which is necessary. And what allows us to do that which is necessary is increasing our frequency of feedback. I challenge you to do so.